Hello, and thanks for joining us. For the second day in a row, Hong Kong reported no new coronavirus cases.
The total number of infections now stands at 1,037. Kina Chu reports.
The week began with more good news as there were no new cases of COVID-19 in the city. That makes 2 straight days of 0 cases and the 4th time in 8 days there's been no need for a government briefing. Also, the majority of the newly infected in recent weeks have been people returning from overseas. Still, Civic Party lawmaker and Dr. Kwok Ka-ki advised against lifting border control measures or easing quarantine requirements.
Only on this week, we are seeing in mainland China will be reportedly 90 million travelers within the Chinese in the country. They have these so-called invisible carriers, 1 per 1,000. And also they have consistently find cases without the symptoms.
He noted that prior efforts could go down the drain if people are free to travel again. But Dr. Leung Chi-Chu of the Hong Kong Medical Association said it's impractical to keep putting all activities on hold. He recommended authorities to give the green light to some things, including non-emergency hospital services. Meanwhile, as the pandemic has hurt many businesses, food delivery platforms have thrived. That as many customers have opted for takeaway because of social distancing regulations.
If we look at total sales and transaction value, our business has more than doubled in the first quarter of 2020 compared to the last quarter of 2019. But because of different work-from-home policies, today we see that lunch orders are generally 20 to 30% higher than dinner orders. We still expect a month-on-month double-digit growth.
Kina Chu, TVB News.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson returned to work after recovering from COVID-19.
He says the pandemic is the biggest challenge to face his country since World War II. Peter Caveas has details.
Prime Minister Boris Johnson returned to his Downing Street office and residence almost a month to the day since he tested positive for COVID-19. Back in charge, he must now try and find a balance of lifting the lockdown that is destroying the British economy without triggering a deadly second wave of the outbreak.
We must also recognize the risk of a second spike, the risk of losing control of that virus and letting the reproduction rate go back over 1. Because that would mean not only a new wave of death and disease, but also an economic disaster.
As of Sunday, the UK had more than 152,000 infections and 20,732 hospital deaths. 7 weeks ago, Italy was the first country in Europe to impose a nationwide lockdown. Now, Premier Giuseppe Conte is looking at easing restrictions, but in phases. Factories, construction sites, and wholesale supply businesses can resume activity as soon as they put safety measures in place. Starting May 4th, parks will reopen, funerals will be allowed, athletes can resume training, and people will be able to visit relatives living in the same region. If all goes well, stores and museums will reopen on May 18th, and restaurants, cafes, and salons on June 1st. Italy has reported more than 26,000 deaths, the highest in Europe. In Spain, children under the age of 14 were allowed 1 hour of outdoor activity per day with parent supervision for the first time in 6 weeks. Spain has the most infections on the continent with more than 226,000. Tuesday, Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez will present a detailed plan for a de-escalation of Spain's lockdown, but it said it would be cautious. France will unwind its 2-month confinement on May 11th. Schools would be reopened in several stages, with much smaller classes and on a voluntary basis. Retail activities will resume with stricter rules to limit the number of people in shops at the same time. Russia surpassed China with its total infections. Today, the government reported 87,147 cases, which is almost 4,000 more than China's official toll of 83,912. Almost 6,200 new infections were registered in the past 24 hours. Moscow, the country's worst-hit area, confirmed 2,612 new cases, taking its total to 39,509. The capital is approaching its 5th week of coronavirus lockdown. Peter Caveos, TVB News.
Welcome back. The first course subject exam in this year's Hong Kong Diploma of Secondary Education examination took place this morning. Tens of thousands of candidates sat the exam.
As Jackie Lin reports, the compulsory question on press freedom has become the center of attention.
All eyes are on today's Liberal Studies exam, not only because it's the very first core subject exam taken by this year's 47,000 HKDSE candidates, but also due to its possibility to teeter on politically sensitive issues following a politically charged year. The first two compulsory questions in Paper 1 pertain to the relatively less controversial topics, the impacts of the internet and electronic gadgets, and population trends. The third compulsory question, however, touches on the dilemma between press freedom and the media's social responsibility. A number of candidates were taken aback.
People will feel like the paper will avoid asking these questions, so I'm shocked about it.
I was shocked when I answered my question. I very carefully and try to not answer too political.
In an assuring note, teachers say candidates won't be evaluated by their political stance when answering this question.
Even though they have a different point of view, if they can support their view with strong evidence and also according to the requirement of the question, I think no matter what stand they are, they can get high marks or low marks.
For years, Liberal Studies has been caught in the crosshairs amid the city's political squabble. While rumors abound over the subject's precarious fate, education workers hope people can see its value in nurturing our young minds.
We have a formal curriculum to master the way of thinking, the way of analysis, and that will form a very strong base for our Hong Kong society to be more rational.
What will happen in the future, I cannot see through the crystal ball, but I hope that the whole society will treasure this curriculum.
The exams for the remaining three core subjects, English, Chinese, and mathematics, will continue till next Tuesday. The Education Bureau appealed to employers to allow flexible working hours for their staff on these exam days. That would hopefully help ease traffic and allow candidates to reach examination centers on time. Jackie Lin, TVB News.
The Competition Commission says it needs more power to investigate whether fuel prices in the city are being fixed. At LegCo's meeting of the Panel of Economic Development, lawmakers demanded government officials explain why Hong Kongers pay extremely high prices for petrol, even as global oil prices plunge. Haley Zhou reports.
Oil prices is plummeting worldwide, but then we find that in Hong Kong, the oil prices it's not affected at all. This has all along been the situation in Hong Kong.
Since January, there has been 11 times when oil prices have been adjusted downwards, 8 times in March alone.
There is still some room for downward adjustment of oil prices in Hong Kong. We agreed to this. We have already conveyed this message to the oil companies.
Lawmakers are not sold.
The government seems to be speaking for the oil companies, whereas the Competition Commission is speaking for the people.
Some lawmakers suspect oil companies are fixing the price, accusing the government of failing to address market failure.
In the past 14 days, oil company A and B, both companies selling oil at the same price, 17.4, and then within 14 days, 9 of which the oil prices of these two companies were identical. It's as close as down to the cent. The pattern is very clear. There is a case of suspected price fixing, isn't it?
Does the administration agree that the oligopoly is a market failure requiring intervention from the government, yes or no? We do intervene. We have a tender system to increase number of suppliers. There are 6 of them. The measures you have fail to address the market failure brought by the oligopoly.
The watchdog wants the government to hand over some information it has received from the oil companies.
It's difficult for us to find and get the information. We have asked the government, we have asked oil companies. The reply from oil companies is that it's sensitive information, we can't give it to you. My impression that the government gets more information than we do.
And it also wants more power while asking for more transparency from the government.
The government bureau should openly declare and admit if from an environmental point of view you're trying to control the number of vehicles on the road, I don't want a whole lot of cheaper petrol stations, then they should make that very clear. We will never get a less expensive oil market.
Haley Zhou, TVB News.
Arrest warrants have been issued for 2 teens who were allegedly involved in anti-extradition protests. The boys failed to attend their court hearings at Kowloon City Magistracy. Hong Lam Phuc is charged with attempted arson and possession of an offensive weapon. A 16-year-old is accused of trying to set a fire outside Mong Kok Police Station last October. Meanwhile, Jan Chung Kit is charged with rioting and arson. Last year, the teen allegedly set fire to another person's property in Prince Edward.
Parking fees of 12 government public car parks will be frozen for 1 year from June 1st. The Transport Department says the economic impact of the coronavirus pandemic is one of the reasons for the move. It has also taken into account the inflation rate, private car park charges, and the utilization rates of the government car parks. The 12 car parks last increased their fees in June 2019. That's the news. Thanks for watching.
Bye for now.